to this week's Money Metals podcast, helping gold and silver investors during these turbulent times. Now, this week's market wrap with commentary and analysis from Money Metals Exchange, the company named Best Overall Precious Metals Dealer by Investopedia.
Welcome to this week's Market Wrap podcast. I'm Mike Leeson. Coming up in a moment, we have a special interview with Mark O'Byrne, the founder of Terra Coins in Ireland. Not only is Mark the creator of the stunningly beautiful Tree of Life gold and silver coins, available at moneymetals.com, but he is also a bona fide Emerald Isle historian and longtime sound money proponent. Mark has some interesting things to say on a range of topics during an enlightening conversation, so be sure to stick around for this week's exclusive Money Metals interview between Mike Maharrey and Ireland's Mark O'Byrne coming up after this week's market update. And as a reminder, please download, like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast, wherever you consume this content. Well, don't just do something, stand there. As backwards as that sounds, it turns out this might be a pretty good investment strategy. Research conducted by Dalbar, Fidelity, and Vanguard reveals that dead people tend to be better investors than the living. However, holders of gold and silver can also adopt the strategy a dead person would employ, doing absolutely nothing. Based on this research, the best investors aren't necessarily the smartest people. They don't have degrees in finance. They aren't even the most experienced. Either they are deceased or still walking among us, simply having forgotten they had an investment account. In either case, your investment is not tinkered with. You just let it ride. You don't overreact to every news headline. You don't panic when the Dow has a down day. You don't freak out when you see a precious metals ticker bleeding red. Business coach Nat Berman put it this way in a post on X, quote, "The best investors are patient, consistent, and almost boring. They set a strategy, automate contributions, and let compounding do the work. They don't let emotions drive decisions and are humble about what they can't predict. The traits that create exceptional investors are all learnable: patience, consistency, humility, and emotional control," end quote. One key point here is whether someone gets caught up in emotion. Of course, humans are emotional beings, and emotions often drive our decision-making. In fairness, when gold and silver sold off steeply on the last trading day in January, it was uncomfortable watching the negative numbers get bigger and bigger. Brad Klontz is a certified financial planner and financial psychologist. He says human behavior is the biggest threat to our portfolio. Quote, "It's them selling investments when they're in a panic state and conversely buying when they're all excited. We are our own worst enemy. And that's why dead investors outperform the living," end quote. Klontz said humans are evolutionarily wired to run with the herd, but that is absolutely the wrong way to invest. Big market moves can trigger a fight or flight response in our brains, and our intuition can drive immediate emotional responses. If you watch the markets at all, you know that every bit of news seems to drive some kind of move. But almost all of them are short-lived. So you don't want to react to every new post that pops up on X. Trying to time the markets based on what has become a 30-second news cycle can wreck your savings and your sanity. It's not that you should ignore headlines completely, but you should always try to put them into a broader context. This is why we constantly emphasize the macro environment here at Money Metals. When you see a price swing, ask yourself, did anything just happen signaling a change in the fundamentals? If the answer is yes, well, it might be time to make a move. But if the answer is no, you probably want to stand pat. The best course is to avoid overexposure in any single investment. Keep your emotions in check, stay focused on the fundamentals, and avoid reacting to every news headline or price move. And when it comes to gold, remember that the powers that be are always going to be debasing your currency. You lose purchasing power week after week. No headline is going to change that reality. Well, before we get to this week's interview, let's take a look at the weekly market action in the metals here. Gold is down nearly $150 or 2.8% on the week to come in at $5,145, although it has bounced here the last couple of days from even deeper sold-off levels earlier in the week. Similar story in silver. The white metal had pulled back quite substantially through Wednesday, but has pared those losses a bit here the last 2 days. Silver, despite the rally the last 48 hours or so, is still off nearly $10 an ounce since last Friday's big up day and weekly close, checking in currently at $84.66, down 10.4%. Essentially, the silver market has done a complete round trip during what have been back-to-back fairly volatile weeks, and we're seeing the metal trade today at basically exactly where it was this time 2 Fridays ago. Turning to platinum, it too, like silver, is down double digits. Industrial metal is off 10.2% since last Friday's close to trade at $2,139 with a few hours left in the trading week. And finally, palladium is down a little more than $150 an ounce to check in at $1,649, off 8.6% on the week. Well now, without further delay, let's get right to this week's exclusive interview.
Greetings, I'm Mike Meharry, and I'm joined today by Mark O'Byrne. Mark is the founder of Terra Coins. He's also a well-known authority on gold and silver. How are you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing very well, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's always a pleasure. It's great to talk to you, especially as we get close to St. Patrick's Day here. And you are speaking to me from Ireland, if folks don't know that. And to get started, I think it's been about a year since we chatted. So I want you to just real quickly tell folks a little bit about Terra Coins and the business that you have over there.
Yeah, so basically, I set up a company. My first company was Goldcore. We were the largest gold broker in Ireland. I set up that business in 2003 and then left in 2020. And I was selling basically gold bars, silver bars, gold, crew grands, eagles, all the standard bullion products. And it was a successful business, but I just did it for 7 years and I was getting a bit bored with it. But I always had people come to me, particularly Irish American people, saying, why aren't there Irish coins, Irish bullion coins? And, because there's South African, Canadian, Australian, American, British, Austrian even, so there's all these legal tender coins. Why aren't there Irish ones? So I never understood, and I used to ask questions about that. And long story short, they wouldn't do it. The Irish Central Bank wouldn't do it. They do some collector's coins, but they wouldn't do the legal tender bullion coins, So I decided to do it in 2023. A lot of people were pushing me and prodding me saying you should do this. So I did it. So I spent a lot of time sort of feeling into it. Like I studied history. My background is actually studying history, economic history and monetary history, and the rise and fall of empires, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire. So I was always interested in the currency because that was always a motivation of empire, was controlling the gold and the silver and then creating their own coinage. And the likes of Alexander the Great would put their faces on the coins, So I was always fascinated even in the numismatic side of it in terms of, coin collecting and all the rest, because a coin can tell a lot about a civilization or a nation at a period in time. So long story short, I spent a lot of time figuring out, what are the sacred symbols of Ireland, because I want to make this coin really, really capture the essence of who we are as a people and honor our ancestors, So long story short, as a picture paints 1,000 words, so I created this beautiful coin, which is they're called the Trees of Life. So that's the silver one, which is being sold by Money Metals Exchange, who are our biggest partner in the US and our best partner in the US in terms of distribution. And they buy them wholesale from us and then they sell them retail to their clients, and they also store them in their vaults in Idaho, which I believe are some of the safest vaults in America, So yeah, the Tree of Life is basically, it's a fascinating symbol. It's sacred in nearly all spiritual traditions, all religions, and it's very big in Christianity, in Celtic Christianity, and obviously in international global Christianity, because it's actually in the Bible. It's basically, the Tree of Life is at the end of the book of Revelations, and it's very interesting. We're in a time of Revelations today. I think there's a lot of things being revealed, as we know. So, and people think Revelations is like the end of the world and the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but it's actually a beautiful redemptive vision at the end of the book of Revelation, which is actually talking about the abundance of nature. And it talks about the water of life and the tree of life, and how all the nations of the world would come together in peace and they would enjoy the fruits and the leaves of the tree of life. So that's why it's such an important symbolism. Yeah. So that's the tree of life, and then the other side is basically the harp, which is a symbol of it's a symbol, I suppose, obviously of music, but it was a very sacred symbol in Irish culture. It's actually on our passports as well. And then the tri-spiral, which is basically the energy. They believe it's past, present, future, but it could also be the masculine, the feminine, and the child. So it's the cycle of life and fertility as well. So they're basically sacred symbols, and people, they really love them. They love the designs because they really do, I suppose, honor and respect the culture, the sacred culture that we had in this country. There was a sort of a lot of wisdom in this nation many years ago. Obviously, we suffer from imperialism and from colonization, but we're sort of remembering that there was this ancient past that was quite an evolved civilization. So that's what it's about, and ultimately it's about their stores of value. As you know, they are, throughout history, gold and silver have been money. They protected people throughout history. They're not going up in value today. Everyone saying, oh, the price of gold and silver is going up, and is it a bubble, and it has a collapse and has a crash. They're not going up at all. It's the dollar and the euro and all these fiat currencies are losing value versus gold and silver. So these are beautiful stores of value that people are buying to protect themselves from the ongoing currency devaluation that's happening in the world. So yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. They're 49 pure, so investment grade, 24 carats, and you can actually put them into the IRAs, individual retirement accounts. And they're proven popular with Irish Americans in particular. So hopefully in the run into St. Patrick's Day, people might, and they make beautiful gifts for people as well, and it's a great way to pass on wealth to the next generation, to children, to grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and they're a wonderful gift. Rather than giving a $50 note or a €50 note to your children or grandchildren, why not give them a beautiful piece of art, in effect, that they'll have for forever and ever. They become keepsakes and family heirlooms potentially,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right when you use the word art, because they are absolutely gorgeous. I've got some, and I actually gave a silver coin to each of my kids last year for St. Patrick's Day. And
brilliant.
Yeah,
that's great to hear.
It was fun. I was telling my daughter the other day. I said, that Irish coin that I gave you, and she said, yeah. I said, it's worth double now what it was when I gave it to you. So she appreciated that aspect of it as well. But they really are beautiful, and folks can go over to moneymetals.com and check those out if they're interested, because they would make a beautiful keepsake for St. Patrick's Day. Hey, I'm curious about something, and this is a total aside, and I wasn't planning on asking you this, but you mentioned it. And with your interest in coins and money, is there a particular coin that is your favorite, something that like really intrigues you, either because of the design or because of the history behind it? Is there one particular piece that really intrigues you?
Well, there's not really one in particular. I mean, there's a lot, but I mean, I mentioned Alexander the Great. I mean, it's fascinating how that coin became one of the most minted coins in that period of time, and they would basically, that empire, I mean, Alexander the Great went all the way from Greece into India, so, and they were basically taking the gold in everywhere they conquered. They would take the gold, either physically, they would vanquish the enemies and then they would take the gold, or they would ransom it and say, right, if you don't make peace with us and give us a lot of gold, we will take over your city and ransack the place, basically. So that's a very interesting one, because it really tells the history of mankind is just waves of empires rising and empires falling, So there's nothing new under the sun. And the British gold sovereign is a very interesting coin as well. And it's interesting for a number of reasons, because it's 0.2354 of an ounce of gold. So it's a quarter ounce of gold, about 22 carats. So, and it used to be a pound, like it was a pound sterling. So I think the pound sterling, and that's where the word sterling silver comes from, So I can't remember, I think it was 14 ounces or maybe 16 ounces to the pound. So that even shows you the gold silver ratio throughout history, that this one little quarter ounce gold sovereign was the equivalent of, so a quarter, so the equivalent of probably 4 ounces or 6 ounces, So they tell you so much. The story of the story of humanity, in effect, is in some of these ancient coins, and also the economic history, the monetary history, the ratios, why gold and silver were so important, So yeah, I like the Sand Gardens as well in America. They're beautiful, beautiful design, and I think they're particularly just the design in them, and even like the Statue of Liberty on coins, it just is a symbol of what America is really about, which is that true spirit of freedom for people and for families and for small businesses and for the little guy to do well. That was why people see America as this beacon of hope in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. Let's talk a little bit about history, since you are a historian, and people will not be shocked with a name like Meharry to find out that my background is Irish, and looking at DNA, apparently Scotch-Irish. But so I've always been very interested in Irish and Celtic history, and particularly Celtic Christianity. And I'm curious about how gold and silver evolved as money in ancient Ireland. I know that there's kind of a perception that cattle was the primary currency, and you've argued that that's not quite the fact. So can you kind of clear that up for us?
Yes, it's really interesting. I mean, I studied history. I also studied archaeology in the first year of my degree. And it never really made sense to me. I was like, I just couldn't understand it. Like, that cognitive dissonance thing. But everybody accepted that was the fact that we use cows as money. But how could you use cows as money? I mean, it was an agrarian economy. We're actually realizing now it was much more sophisticated. We thought that they weren't like Stone Age Neolithic farmers. There was actually quite sophisticated urban settlements, even going back 3,000, 4,000, potentially 5,000 years ago. So how with these small urban settlements would they trade amongst themselves? If one person has, 6 eggs or 12 eggs, and someone else has a cup of honey. I don't know how they keep the honey in the old days, but they have honey. So how they basically had sophisticated means of exchange, and a lot of it was barter. So they'd be bartering food amongst themselves, but they're also using pieces of metal. And it's interesting, in the old Irish, it's called pisa, P-I-F-O-S-A, which means a piece of metal. So they didn't have metallurgy. They hadn't developed it. That came much later, obviously, with the Lydians in Lydia, which is Asia Minor in present-day Turkey, were the first gold coins. And then obviously the Greeks evolved that. So they had metallurgy, which allowed them to refine the gold and make the gold, silver, and copper coins pure. But they didn't have that going back 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, nor did they have the minting technology to mint beautiful coins, So what they basically did was they would get the gold, silver, and copper, and they would, back then it was quite abundant because a lot of it was actually in the streams, particularly the gold. So they would be panning for gold. They would be getting gold close to level. They didn't have to go too deep, and then they would get that all together, and then they had forges. So it's interesting. One of the most famous saints in Ireland is a saint called, obviously, St. Patrick's Day going up, but there's this female saint called St. Bridget, who was as famous, not more famous, and maybe more trusted than St. Patrick in some ways. And she's very much associated with the fire and the water, and as being a smith. So she is associated with being a metal smith and creating beautiful sacred artifacts made from precious metals. And she's associated with the forge. So the forge, you would use fire to basically. So basically, they would just stamp and hammer these pieces of metals into small sort of discs of gold, silver, and particularly bronze, because obviously bronze or copper was much more abundant, So it's very interesting. The words in Irish, arrogate is the word for money in Irish, arrogate, and it sounds like argentum, which is interesting, and which is the Roman word for gold and silver combined. And then in Greek, it's argyros is silver as well. So it's a very similar. So it's arrogate, but arrogant is both the word for money, but it's also the word for silver. So similar to en français, it's l'argent. Argent is silver in French, and it's also money in French. Same with rupee. Rupee is silver and money as well, So we had what's called arrogant bui was gold or yellow money, and then arrogant gyal was the silver money or moon money, and then arrogant rua was the earth money. So it's really, really interesting. And they actually associated with kingship and the sun, and then silver was associated with the moon and water, and then copper is associated with the earth, the red earth, So they basically used small pieces of metal in exchange with each other, for 1,000 years, and this is now being realized. It's in the archaeological record. They found these hordes of little pieces of metal, and they've also found it evolved into what's called fáinne, which is ring money. So they would have basically little rings. So obviously we only use rings today today for, beautiful gifts and for engagement rings and wedding rings. Back then, they were actually using them as both a store of value that they would have on their fingers, but also as a means of exchange. If they wanted to buy a cow, I'm sure with one gold ring, you could probably buy a few cows, So yeah, metals were a big part of our culture, and it's interesting. It's sort of written out of the culture. I think that's what empire does, because the empire wants to monopolize the currency for itself. The kings, the queens, the emperors, the empresses, and the oligarchs at the top always want to control the money. Because that's how you have control, is by controlling the money ultimately, and the land and the sea. So it's very, very interesting that the history of money, because it tends to repeat itself, as you know, Mike.
Yeah. You mentioned to me as we were talking before we actually went live. I don't know if I guess I should say before we recorded, we're not really live, but you mentioned the fact that the British government actually monopolized the money in Ireland. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, it wasn't so much the government, because it was a feudal. It was the kings, basically, the kings and queens. Yeah, that their oligarchs, their lords, and dukes, and all the rest of it. So basically, it's very interesting. The first mint in Ireland was actually the Vikings came into Dublin in around 800 AD. And the first mint in Ireland was in around that time. And there's still to this day, there's these beautiful coins that the Vikings created, particularly small silver pennies. And there was a king called King Sitrick, who was a Viking king who came to Dublin. And we still have these coins with his face on them, So then, but it was interesting as it evolved in, I think, 11th to 12th century. Some of the Normans came in from the north of France, and I think they obviously had the minting technology, because it survived. Obviously, the Roman Empire collapsed, but it was Charlemagne in around 800 AD, who was the emperor of Europe. He brought back minting quite a big way, and brought back sort of a common currency, if you will, for that European empire that he was creating. And then his emissaries, if you will, came into Ireland because they wanted to it was a land of milk and honey. They wanted the land. It's pretty much that simple, Well, there was also a lot of gold and silver here as well, So they came in and they started taking the gold and silver and taking the lands by military force, and then they based mints in 5 of the cities: Dublin, Cork, Waterford, Limerick, and I think Drogheda. There was 5, maybe 6. So there was quite a big, that's very decentralized, lots of mints going on. But gradually the crown in London was becoming more and more powerful, and they were centralizing power, and they saw that as a competitive threat, in effect, So gradually over time, these mints were shut down. It was all centralized into the Royal Mint, So it's very interesting today because, I suppose even with Bitcoin, all the talk was about decentralization, and it's not really decentralized at all, really, because it's completely dependent on the digital technology and on digital devices and on electricity and all these things. So it's not decentralized. Whereas if you have gold and silver coins outside of the banking system, either in your possession or very, very safe vaults, such as with Money Metals Depository in Idaho, then it is decentralized. It's because it's out of the central system type of thing, So yeah, it's very, very interesting, and I think it's interesting. There's a lot of mints popping up all over the world now. So there is a renaissance in minting, which is great to see all around the world, because people are going back to these metals. A minority of people still, and it's still in its infancy. But I think this is a long-term trend that's going to continue this is not, as you know, and you guys cover very, very well, this is not cyclical. This is very much this is a long-term structural issue that's happening. And I think it's going to take place for the next, 15, 20, 30 years,
Yeah, speaking of that and kind of pulling us into the present, you talk about that currency devaluation, and that's also a mark of empire and a mark of big government. They have to devalue in order to maintain the borrowing and the spending and to maintain the empire itself. And I was reading that the euro has devalued 94% since its inception and 75% in the last 10 years. So apparently it's not just the U.S. government that is fond of devaluing its currency, huh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I did a research piece on it recently, and it's on the taracoins.com website, where we also have a piece actually on what we just spoke about there, the gold and silver in ancient Ireland, if people are interested in it. So yeah, basically the euro. When the euro was introduced in 1999, by certain financial interests and by certain commentators, particularly obviously the European Central Bank, the central banks of Europe were positioning this euro as a rival to the dollar, and they're basically saying this was going to become the reserve currency of the world, So, but when you look at the history of the euro, I mean, you and me, I think we've talked about this in the previous interview. The dollar, as we know, is devalued 99% as the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. But people don't, so everyone talks about that, and everyone talks about the dollar devaluation that's going on, and we know that. But no one is talking about the devaluation of the euro since 1999 alone. So since 1999 alone, the euro 260 euros per ounce to around 4,400 euros per ounce, So it's gone up about 1,600%. And in terms of, and as I said before, it's not gone up. As we know, it's losing purchasing power, and it's being devalued versus gold. So in real terms, gold is actually, or the euro, I should say, has depreciated 11.3% per annum versus gold over the last 26 years. So that's huge, obviously, when you compound that 11.3% over time, so 93% loss in 26 years. So that right there just proves categorically how fiat currencies are actually dangerous to people's financial well-being, and yet this is not talked about. This is taboo, and the euro has, the Eurozone has huge challenges still in terms of the level of debt that we have in the different nation states, the lack of coherent policy, it's not democratic. There's quite a bit of corruption at the highest levels in the EU, So, and now they're trying to take us into wars, which are very, very expensive. So anyway, the whole thing doesn't bode well. And ultimately, I mean, last year alone, the dollar fell 66% versus gold, but the euro fell 46% versus gold. So, and we see this, certain years the euro might be a little bit stronger versus the dollar, and the dollar might be slightly stronger versus euro. But over time, they're both being devalued by roughly 10 or 11% per annum, And ultimately, the US can't afford to have the euro too weak, and the Eurozone can't afford to have the dollar too weak. So they will engage in what's called competitive currency devaluations. Mm-hmm. So this is the key thing for everybody to know, that it's all the fiat currencies have been devalued. There's no safe haven. I mean, even the Swiss franc, and Switzerland is more of a safe haven than most countries. But even the Swiss franc is down, I think, 9.5% over the long term. And that's one of the safer currencies, and it's a creditor nation. It doesn't have any debt, unlike the US and the Eurozone nations. So yeah, it proves, and it just proves that the nonsense that this reserve currency thing. The dollar is we're seeing the dollarization. The dollar is losing its reserve currency status. But what's very interesting is all the talk from the media was saying that the euro would supplant the dollar, but that's not happened. What's happened is gold is supplanting the dollar, and now gold is now the second largest foreign reserve or foreign exchange asset on the central bank balance sheets, not the euro.
Yeah.
So that trend's going to continue given the imbalances and the uncertainty in the world.
I'm curious about your perception of this from kind of more of a European perspective, because I talk a lot about de-dollarization because I do believe that that's a legitimate trend, and I think we're seeing that in the acceleration of central bank gold buying. But I think a lot of people in the United States kind of hear that and they're like, "Oh, and it's not really a problem. Everybody wants dollars. The dollar's fine." From a European perspective, do you think that the de-dollarization trend is a real thing? I mean, is this something that you're hearing from folks on that side of the pond?
Oh, no, it is. It's been spoken about. I don't think the masses are that aware of it per se, but definitely, middle class people, business people, people who are in any way engaged with current affairs or news are aware that it's a trend. But it is downplayed, whereby sometimes they almost suggest that, oh, well, there's almost like this rivalry that, oh, well, this means America's on the decline and Europe's on the rise type of thing, not realizing that, we're all joined at the hip, and that was the nature of globalization, that we're all dependent on each other in terms of trade and trade flows. So we can't afford to have one currency become massively strong or weak versus the other currency, because it would destroy us. We need export growth, and obviously that's a big thing that Trump said he was going to do, was to bring jobs and manufacturing back to the heartland, So it is spoken about in Europe, but it's very much sort of oh, America's on the wane type of thing. America's on the decline and Europe's on the rise. It's like, unfortunately, I think both, they're all on the decline from my perspective, because unfortunately they don't believe in free markets. They don't believe in fiscal honesty, fiscal prudence, balanced budgets, living within your means. They're all just spending way beyond their means, and that conversation about being fiscally conservative, it's not even on the table now. Because at least before, whether it be the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times, the main financial newspapers on Bloomberg and CNBC, there would be conversations. People would be saying, these governments need to live within their means. Whereas now it's just like, no, they can just go on keyboards, and it's very, very dangerous, So ultimately, we're all, globally, all these currencies have been devalued, and that's what bodes so well for the gold price, because all the currencies are going to be devalued versus gold. Yeah. And I do believe in the next, I don't like making price predictions, and I try not to. But I think you have to sort of realize that this is structural, as I said, and therefore, there was a very interesting study recently. Van Eck came out with a report saying that they believe if global M2, which is global money supply, is backed by gold, it will result in a gold price of $184,000 per ounce, in the long term. And it sounds crazy. And even as I say, it sounds crazy. And I'm not saying that will happen, but I think there's no reason why it couldn't happen in the next 40 years. By 2065, why couldn't gold be at $184,000, and our children and grandchildren gradually see, as is seen in the last 25 years.
Yeah. I mean, 2 years ago, 3 years.
2005. Yeah, exactly. You would have been laughed at, and you would have been called a crazy gold bug, Yeah. So this is, unless the only thing that will stop gold going to those astronomical levels is if they start talking about having sound money and balanced budgets and living within their means, And one last thing, the Van Eck report was very interesting, because I looked at it, I said, how did they calculate the M2, global M2? What is global M2 even, So M0 is basically a very narrow measurement of money, which is basically cash in circulation and cash in the bank reserves. Then M2 is a wider definition, which is that it's the M0 plus it's your term deposits, bank deposits, money market funds. So it's a much broader definition of money. So they say global M2 is basically US, EU, Japan, and China money supply. But they ignored, there's India, there's Russia, there's Brazil, there's the BRICS. Their money supply is going through the roof as well, So they ignored offshore jurisdictions. They ignored the Middle East, North Africa, Saudi Arabia, Dubai. So when I actually put those numbers into the AI and did research on it, it went from it went from 184,000 to balance the books backed by global M2 to about $225,000 per ounce, So I know, and I'm not saying that for people to say, oh, wow, we're going to get rich, the price is going to go way higher. I'm just saying, just take a long-term view. A lot of people, they seem to think it's about getting rich in the next 2, 3, 4 years, and it's all about buying and then selling. And that's not what it's about. It is about wealth preservation over the long term, And there's nothing wrong with selling on occasion. People might, younger generations of people, many of them don't have their own family home, so they may have an intention to put a lot into gold and silver now. They hope to see the revaluation of gold and silver, and then they want to buy a property in the family home, whatever. So that's fine as well. But the key is just always focus on the long term and realize that these currencies are being debased, because debasement is a very interesting thing that's been seen throughout history, and it comes from the word base metal. So the kings, the queens, the emperors and empresses basically put base metal into the coins. They took the gold and silver out for themselves and they put the base metals in. So that's what currency debasement is. And we're seeing that today, because today they don't even put base metal in. It's just digits on the screen, At least in the old days, at least you'd have copper, you'd have zinc, or you'd have iron, you'd have some metallic coin, which they didn't really trust because they wanted gold and silver, but they trusted it to a degree. They had to. Right. But today they just go on a keyboard and create trillions, as we know. So the currency debasement today is on a scale we've never seen before in the history of mankind.
Yeah, you make a great point. I say all the time, if there isn't anything wrong with selling if you want to buy something or you need to pay off debt or whatever you need to do. But I think it's foolish to simply sell gold and silver to chase a profit. quote unquote profit, because you're just trading good money for bad. And if you're going to hold money over time, you want to hold sound money that's not going to lose its value. And that's why folks need to consider having gold and silver. So before we go, I do want you to let...
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah. I want you to let folks know where they can find Terra coins. Of course, you can find those beautiful silver Tree of Life over at moneymetals.com. But if people want to check out Terra coins, where do they go?
Yeah, it's terracoins.com. And yeah, as I said, there's a resource page there where we do research on, I suppose, the history of money and both past, present, and future, because there's a continuum here, Mike. I think we're beginning to join the dots and realize that this has been seen throughout history. So yeah, terracoins.com, and then I'm on x.com and on linkedin.com, and yeah, feel free to contact me about the gold and silver trees. And obviously, yeah, with MMX, St. Patrick's Day is coming up, so buy a few tubes of silver trees, and your family will like. People really, there's something quite special about them. There's a bit of a wow factor that they really are, just the quality of the minting, but also the designs, and they really, because we're the only country, Ireland's the only country that has a harp. It's a sacred instrument. It's actually in the Bible, I think, something like 42 times the harp, and it's basically it's a symbol of joy, and in a state of joy you connect to the energy of the universe or God, which is the same thing. So they celebrate music, culture, spirituality, Celtic Christianity, which is a very, very interesting thing, So yeah, I really appreciate you having me on again, Mike, and yeah, we'll talk again soon, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. It's always great to talk to you, and I love getting a little bit different perspective than typically what we get here in the United States. We Americans can be a little bit myopic sometimes when it comes to the rest of the world. So it's always a pleasure to talk to somebody across the pond, as the saying goes, and get a little bit of a different view of things. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day. And
you're really good, Mike. Thank you.
Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
You too. Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Interesting stuff from our good friend Marco Byrne, checking in there from Ireland, as if you couldn't tell with that accent. I hope you enjoyed that interview, and that will do it for this week. Be sure to check back next Friday for our next weekly Market Wrap podcast. And don't miss our second weekly podcast, the Money Metals Midweek Memo, hosted by Mike Meharry and available each Wednesday. To check out any of our audio programs, just visit moneymetals.com/podcasts, or find them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And as a big help to us, we would ask that you please like, subscribe, download, and rate our podcasts. Doing so helps us extend the reach of this material. Until next time, this has been Mike Leeson with Money Metals Exchange. Thanks for listening, and have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Money Metals podcast. Be sure to come back next week. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast through iTunes. For answers to all of your questions, or to discreetly and securely buy or sell gold or silver coins, bars, and rounds, call 1-800-800-1865 or visit www.moneymetals.com. Our knowledgeable and no-pressure specialists are standing by to answer your call during business hours, Monday through Saturday. Or you can lock in your order online, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Again, visit us at www.moneymetals.com or call 1-800-800-1865.